Hello, listeners. Thank you very much for tuning in to Somerford Associates Technology Podcast. I'm Anne, and I'm delighted to be clearing up DevSecOps for you today. On the line as well, I'm really privileged to have Chris Riley, our resident expert from Splunk. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Anne. Thank you. And I'm excited as well. This is number 3 episode. So I must be doing something right. You keep on inviting me back.
Oh, yeah, I really, and this is your topic that you absolutely love. Is the
I do.
Senior Technology Advocate, has been a developer. DevSecOps is your sort of happy place.
It is, which sounds kind of weird because most people think of security as kind of a punishment versus a benefit, but we'll talk about that.
So if you're listening, you don't have to be in a company that has a technical product as their prime purpose to need, well, DevOps and by extension DevSecOps. We're sort of talking to a theoretical software delivery team. So anyone, if you're a developer or a quality engineer, DevOps engineer, maybe SRE, anyone who's, if you have a website and if you have responsibilities for changing it or keeping it operational, or securing that software factory, then this podcast could be for you. And we'll be discussing what we mean by DevSecOps, who needs it, Splunk's definition. I'm sure there's other theories out there, but Splunks is pretty good, I think. And then we'll get some practicalities out there, what capabilities and tools you might need, and some tangible examples, as I love to get actual and reality rather than just words. And then we'll also get realistic with, what problems and challenges have we seen our clients face trying to do this, and importantly, what your next steps should be. So if that sounds good, carry on listening, and let's get going, Chris. So what are we talking about, and why are we talking about DevSecOps?
Yeah, like I said early on, security is one of those things that especially developers kind of feel like it's a punishment. What a lot of developers don't realize, and I like to use this analogy of a McLaren F1 race car, is that if you do not consider security in how you build your applications, how you deliver your applications, then it will come back and quote unquote bite you. And what I mean by that, it will slow you down no matter what, whether you consider it today or you kind of hand it over the fence to your security team. They will come knocking on your door and delay your sprints, your releases, et cetera. So no matter what, security is going to impact your ability to build functionality. The benefit of considering it early in the application development lifecycle is that it's much less disruptive. It's a part of your healthy hygiene in building the application, and it reduces the potential of everybody pulling the ripcord and saying, stop everything. We need to know what's going on here. Or hopefully, this doesn't happen. A vulnerability is found, it's exploited, and now you have to deal with it.
Well, in production, yeah, that would be.
Yeah. And so back to the analogy, like if you had a chance to drive a race car and they said, it's yours, go as fast as you want. And you get in it and you look in front of you and you see a country dirt road and you realize you don't have a helmet or a seatbelt. Doesn't matter how fast that car is. You don't have the tools you need to go fast. And that's what DevSecOps is. It enables velocity in the delivery chain because it just becomes part of your standard operation. And it's not meant to be, let's throw all these obligations onto developers. It's meant to truly address and weave security from the point a feature is defined to the point that feature is running in production. And it's good for everybody. My biggest argument would be is why wouldn't you do it? With all the automation we have today, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, so, okay, that's a very clear case. Thank you. So let's get all of the security bits that you're going to have to do anyway in the process and automated and unpainful, because if they pop up later, they're going to be much worse and a lot more painful. Okay, so therefore, who needs to do it? I suppose, well, you've said anyone in the delivery team, really.
Yeah, this is the practice of DevSecOps is relatively nascent. And when we think about DevSecOps, there's three pillars, and each pillar tends to have somebody who owns the metrics for it and owns the implementation for it, and
Oh,
they're
but
not
someone
all the
different.
same. Yeah, they're not all the same. And
Uh,
so, kind of very similar to how the SRE, the site reliability engineering role, came into being, I think something similar will happen with DevSecOps. So, most SREs report into operations, but are an embedded partner in engineering. They are a peer in engineering. I think we're going to see something very similar where somebody reports into security but is an embedded partner in engineering and potentially be called DevSecOps.
I see.
And right now, I've only seen one company engage with one company where that's the case. And it was very cool. And it also meant that they already had the culture in place because that is a big part of it. But if you don't have that, typically what I see is the DevOps engineering team is the primary driver for this effort,
Hmm.
and they are tend to be the ones that take it very seriously, because the other thing that's happening out in market is delivery chain attacks on the software factory are also increasing. And what's the difference between that and building more secure applications? Attacks on the software factory are attempts to get access to secrets, access to repositories, etc., from outsiders, and then leverage those in production, or even more interestingly, embedding your own artifacts, injecting your own artifacts into the build process so that you can leverage their exploits in production. So DevOps engineers care about this a lot. And so you see them driving this, maybe with some influence from the security team. When it comes to building more secure applications, it's very much the developer's responsibility to instrument that. So that's testing for vulnerabilities, running code quality scans.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder when all the roles will come up, because it is fairly new talking about
Yeah,
DevSecOps. I mean, not that new, but it is, in terms of it, when it's the cutting edge of the problems that we're experiencing, the roles haven't been kind of introduced yet. In fact, I often get, when I do my research onto these topics, it's new when there's people disagreeing as to the definition of it. So, what is Splunk's definition of DevSecOps? What are those three
yeah.
pillars that you're talking
Which
about?
of which of course is the right definition.
Oh, of course, yes.
Um, yeah, I think that there's a lot of variations, and I think it's worth giving a nod to those.
Hmm.
But let me start with Splunk. So we look at DevSecOps as a practice. It's not an application. It's not a specific thing you do. It is a practice, which means that it involves tactical elements, it involves technology, and it involves culture. You can't neglect the culture piece, which I know can be very frustrating for organizations, but I promise you there are ways to operationalize culture. There are. I've seen it done a lot. After the culture piece, you start to talk about the three pillars. The
Hmm.
three pillars are build more secure applications. So this is the process of actually building the application, making sure it is as free of vulnerabilities and exploits as possible.
Yeah.
Securing the software factory, that is making sure that the right people are using the delivery chain in the right way.
And
And then
that's stuff like the role-based access of that, and perhaps,
secrets management,
yes,
access to repositories, and
yes.
a lot of very standard, like who's accessing repositories from where.
Hmm.
Are people using root policy on instances?
Yeah,
Probably not something that should be happening, things of that sort.
yeah.
And then finally, securing production, applications in production. So the latter is something that we largely know, we well understood, we've done forever. Splunk's had technology there for a long time that's very, very powerful.
Mm.
The difference is with the DevSecOps capabilities earlier in the delivery chain, you add context to what happens in incidents in production, which makes security analysts' job easier.
Can you
find
give me an
resolutions
example of that?
faster.
Because I understand what you mean. If you've got the visibility through the pipeline and how you've built the whatever it is, the app, then when it is in production, it'll be easier for the team to pick it up and or to respond to the incident. But could you give me an example to of
Yeah.
that?
So I think the two biggest examples, one would be a known vulnerability. Let's say for whatever reason, an artifact was released with a known vulnerability that was exploited in production. The analyst knows something happened, but they don't know, like they know the outcome of the breach, but they don't know what the cause of the breach was.
Mhm.
By having the analytics around the delivery chain, they can get that context much faster to the point that they know that there was a vulnerability. They know what artifact it was. Now they know what instance it's running on. They can do a rollback. They can shut down. Most likely, the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to kill the traffic and then they're going to go talk to the engineering team.
Yeah.
So that's one example. Another example is secrets. If a secret somehow ends up in production because it was a part of a config file, or even worse, we've seen worse, um, they are able to understand that a breach was the result of somebody getting access to the secret, know that the lease on that secret needs to be destroyed, and address any infrastructure that has that secret associated with it.
Mm.
And so, without that context, without the ability to run SPL basically on these new types of data, they're spending a lot more time chasing incidents and getting to root cause.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
so,
think that the key
go ahead.
little plug is for secrets to be um, ephemeral, like with vaults and automated. But
Yeah,
that's like a
yeah.
end goal for a lot of people. I do
Yeah,
get that.
and you really see HashiVault being one of the most common secrets management tools, but it is unbelievable what developers will do. I've seen secrets end up in commit messages in GitHub.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of crazy instances or unlimited leases. I've seen, somebody like they it's too inconvenient for them not to have an unlimited secret, so they will lease it as unlimited, and that shouldn't be allowed by policy.
Yeah. I mean, I can see why that would tend to happen if I'm a developer and I'm only tracked on my velocity of developing. You want to make things quick and easy for yourself. It's just about getting the right culture again, like you said, to make sure that there aren't these perverse kind of incentives to be naughty.
Right, right. And so, yeah, I mean, I want to expand on the definition a little bit, but it's also funny you say that because I would argue that some of the best developers are the laziest developers. You want to give good guardrails. That's what we're talking about.
Guardrails. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, laziness would mean that you get really efficient with your writing of code. Do you
exactly.
reckon? Yeah. Okay. I see what you
Yeah,
mean.
yeah.
So
Uh,
more on the definition.
Yeah. So, we believe it's a practice. So that's
Mhm.
potentially one unique part of it. We don't believe it's a tool. There's a lot of um, perception in the market that there is a DevSecOps tool that you use and you plug it in and you're done. But most people look at DevSecOps is only one slice of that. So our definition is much broader. They look at the vulnerability part. So most people will think that it relates to the CVE and vulnerability scanning, and that in particular is DevSecOps. But we truly believe that it needs to encompass the entire application delivery process in order to truly be shifting security left.
So do most people think about it just being about building the more secure apps bit, but you're
Correct.
adding on the other
Yep,
two
that's
two
correct.
pillars,
Yep,
like the securing the app factory and securing the
yep.
apps in prod. Okay, I see. And it's just widening it then, making it cover everything and also cover it being a practice, which gives you less of a plug and play kind of perception that you can just
Right.
buy something from a shelf and doop, done.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've been here before. It's no different than DevOps, and
Yeah.
there's a very strong argument to be made that you shouldn't even need to call it DevSecOps because if
No.
you're doing DevOps correctly, security is already
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's when things hit from the perfect world of theory when they probably
there.
kind of started talking about it, DevOps. they probably did consider all of these points. And then when it hits the real world, things change. And then now we're sort of redefining, adding the sec bit in and
Yeah.
trying to correct course a little. It was a
Yeah.
big change anyway to think about DevOps in the way that people are thinking about it now. So this is just the next
Yeah,
change
quite
now.
a bit, quite a bit. And it's healthy
Mm,
that it goes that way and eventually becomes very boring and obvious,
yeah,
which is exciting.
yeah. Bring on the time when this podcast would be really boring and obvious. Okay, I know you said it's not about tools, but I am going to ask you what are those capabilities that you will need a tool
Yeah.
for?
Yeah, and you used. I appreciate you using the term capabilities. I think that's an appropriate way to look at any tooling.
Okay.
Is that these are capabilities that you're using to execute on some strategy, DevSecOps, DevOps, observability, whatever it is. It's there to accelerate and feed that journey, not be the journey. I think a lot of people lean on the tool to solve all the problems for them. And just like in observability, how you instrument is absolutely critical to being successful. How you organize your repositories, for example, is also a big component of application security. So the capabilities you want to look for do align to those three pillars very nicely. The first two, it comes in the form of what's called pipeline analytics. And yeah, it's another term, and I'm sorry. And the way I
So
assimilate terms
I
is
tell you what, I need a picture. I'll send the picture out with the podcast because that will help, I'm sure.
okay, great. So, and the purpose of these terms, or the what should be the purpose of this terminology, is that it makes having conversation easier. And
Yeah.
so, pipeline analytics is very straightforward. You have tools in your tool chain. They produce telemetry and signals and logs. You should collect those. That's it.
You just mean like I know what I'm doing because I've got a Jira ticket for it, and I'm writing it in Git, and then I'm using Jenkins as a
Hmm.
to automate the releases. I've got Vault to keep my secrets. All of
Yep.
those have logs. Let's Splunk them, or
Yep.
whatever other analytic you want to use for
Yep.
gathering all said logs.
Yeah. In pipeline analytics serves three kind of use cases. The first is monitoring.
Hmm.
The second, so monitoring, if your secrets management tool is down or your Jenkins is down, you can't ship code anyways. So like that's just intuitive. Just like everything you do for your applications in production, you should do for the tools in your delivery chain, because your delivery chain is the meta application of applications. So monitoring. Second is business metrics like KPIs,
Hmm.
measure velocity, change failure rate, mean time to delivery, mean time to recover, sometimes referred to as the DORA metrics. And then the last is audit and comply. See who's accessing the tools. Where are they accessing it from? How are they using it? How frequently are they using it? Is there any red flags because we identified a secret being somewhere where it shouldn't be?
Hmm.
And that is really the DevSecOps component. But also monitoring your testing and your vulnerability scans and your code quality scans. So that's all referred to as pipeline analytics. Which use case you use depends on where you are in your journey. But I'd argue that every organization should work to increase their visibility and coverage in all three of those
Yeah.
categories.
I can see why that company that you were referring to, who had someone embedded in the engineering team who was in charge of or just owned these things, it could quite very, very quickly spill into a full-time job, surely, because
Oh yeah.
just yeah.
Yeah. And it's when we talk about shift left, we're not saying shift left, give your developers more work. That's not it. We're saying that the considerations that we used to reserve for production, we're moving earlier in the delivery of the application, such that their impact is less. And impact impacts time, impacts another one of my favorite metrics, unplanned work. So the amount of
Mm,
time developers are spending on toil. If you only consider security in production, toil, the amount of unplanned work in the delivery chain is going to be higher. I guarantee you, because you will spend more time addressing issues because you hadn't prepared for and delivered the metrics to have visibility around them.
Mm. Oh, it is all very familiar to me because I did manufacturing engineering as my
Mm.
master's. So, you know,
Awesome.
you can definitely, it's just, you say a software factory. Yes, I can imagine it in factory terms as well. But
Yeah,
I
it's
think
great.
with our other partners as well. So Mnemonic can help with some of this vulnerability scanning or some of this CM stuff. But HashiCorp is the one that I'm thinking
Oh
mostly.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So Vault and Terraform and Console are all critical aspects of this. And where does Splunk fit? Well, we do not Splunk does not do the scanning. We make the practice visible.
Mm,
So if you are doing vulnerability scanning, which you should be, if you're not doing it today, you better go and do it tomorrow. If you're not doing code quality scans, you better do that tomorrow. We make all of that activity visible such that the security team and everybody in the organization is on the same page.
mm,
So they know and they have confidence that the right thing is being done when building these applications. And what's cool being Splunk is that we are the visibility platform. So we have all of these integrations. We have a great integration into HashiVault. We have a great integration into Terraform to do exactly that. You add the Splunk-based app for HashiVault. You get the metrics in the form that I mentioned to you: monitor, measure, and comply. And you have already started your journey into building a good DevSecOps practice. And I will admit that the biggest challenge comes when you correlate data across tools. So if you want to start to associate what's happening in GitHub Actions, which we have another integration for that's really powerful, with HashiVault, secrets or activity there, that correlation is where you need to create some strategy and think about how you align those data sets.
yeah. And we can help with that, obviously. Tell me, we're still finishing up on this whole getting practical for people on what it means. You've said some things that you need to do tomorrow, which is great. Well, how does Splunk do it? Because I think we could talk about clients, but like Splunk itself has a large amount of things that they develop. Even if it's obviously the platform is a thing that you sell, but then there's also the SaaS offering Splunk Cloud that you maintain and
Yeah. Splunk.
monitor and keep going. So tell me, how's your evolution gone for
Yeah. Yeah.
DevSecOps?
So security is number one, feature number one at
Mm.
Splunk. And our entire product team has made that very clear. Our CPO has made that very clear that security is considered throughout. And the reason I highlight that is because we have to start with the culture bit. And if you're in an organization where it's only important to one person and not to somebody else in the engineering team, that's a problem.
Mm.
So already by default, and this is kind of a luxury of being a tech company, everybody in our engineering team takes security considerations importantly. Now, who really drives the effort? Well, you can't expect developers to tomorrow become security experts or, understand immediately um, how to implement that and instrument that in their code. So it's really driven by two primary teams. One is our DevOps engineering team under productivity, developer productivity, which I think is really interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
speaking to that point, that it does save you time.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, I think that says a lot. And then with our security team,
Yeah.
and they collaborate. And so basically, what the security team is looking for is more context. Like, give me better understanding of what you are doing to make sure that applications deployed are as defect free as possible. And the DevOps engineering team is doing the same. It only benefits them. It's not a punishment, where we already had a very strong pipeline analytics practice even before we started bringing in the data from our vulnerability scans and our code quality scans and monitoring who has access to our repos and from where, because our operations team is also heavily involved in this. And so we were already visualizing this data. So it was natural to increase that visibility with the data from these particular tools. Our vulnerability scanning is, or I believe our artifact management is done with JFrog. And then our release automation process is highly automated, which, by the way, the automation itself also produces telemetry.
Mm.
And so those are the primary drivers. And the thing that's important here is that our DevOps engineering team and our security team doesn't get pushback from engineering if they want something. It's not a question. if there's something that needs to be considered, it gets addressed, it gets prioritized immediately. Our product team knows this, everybody knows this.
Yeah, and I think that's where you're saying that you have got a luxury, because it'd be really ironic if Splunk didn't have great visibility. So, but and being a tech company, I'm thinking it's that I can imagine if I was in a very low tech company, but a techie within a low tech company, there might be quite a lot of other problems where there might be pushback, or there might not be the top drive for it. And I guess the the suggestion for those companies, what would you suggest people do to advocate DevSecOps within there?
Yeah, having lived in, the extreme of that is the startup world, where you have to move very quickly to get an MVP and deliver value to your customers very quickly.
Yeah.
It's challenging, right? Like it's all about value. But what I would say to the technical founders, for example, if I was sitting in a room with them, why they should care about DevSecOps, two things. First is, it's actually not, relative to all the things that you're doing to build your application, it's not that difficult. There are amazing tools out there like HashiVault for secrets management. Like they're not complicated relative to, let's say, Kubernetes. So or figuring out microservices architectures. Like they're not that complicated. And once they're set up, the automation does the work for you. So it's not that complicated. And I think that's the first hurdle. Well, we're gonna spend a lot of time on it. Not really. It is a more or less one-time effort, and the automation takes over.
Cool.
But the second piece of this is, security is a feature. Anymore, it's a feature. I mean, it should have always been a feature, but anymore, it's a feature. It's kind of like working out. You work out to take care of your body so that you live a longer and healthier life. You include security in your application so that your application lives a longer and healthier life. Because if you're a small company and something happens in production related to an incident and your customer's data is exposed, you're out of business.
Yeah.
So
And that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Put it in as part of your task.
It's a feature.
Whatever you do, it's a feature.
Yeah. And I believe observability is a feature as well, because people are concerned not just if an application is up or down, if it's behaving as it should behave. And that's where observability comes in. These are features of your application. And to the point that I've seen organizations include observability and security in their issues and tickets in their backlog. So for every feature they build, they have, as a part of the user story, a security and an observability component. How will this affect our users, and how could it potentially increase the risk of our attack surface? And so, or the size of our attack surface. That's a more appropriate way of putting it.
That's really great. Thank you. Because I think that I kind of wanted to get real in this podcast about what challenges people will have. And you've kind of talked about the fact that there might be this fear around it being difficult, but actually, versus working out microservices is not difficult at all. And another good way of thinking of it is just, it's a feature. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
When you were talking about observability, did remind me that you I want to just clarify the terms for people who aren't so much in this world. So, because Splunk has an observability suite, which is about evaluating the health of your applications and things. And when we're talking about pipeline analytics, we're talking about the build factory and analyzing that
Yeah.
value, right? Okay. So I just want to check that I'm.
So yeah, and let's put it all together. I use this term code to cloud visibility as the comprehensive picture of how do you create visibility from the point a feature is defined to the point that feature is running in production and back again, because the feedback loop is actually really important. And so when we talk in those terms, we're talking about the entire engineering org, the entire software delivery chain, and your cloud environment. What does it take to build code to cloud visibility? It requires pipeline analytics, it requires observability, and it requires a SIM. Those are the three components. And what's cool about thinking in terms of code to cloud is you can use that as a coverage metrics to say, where are we weak? Where are we lacking visibility? Maybe you're really good at the SIM and you're really good at pipeline analytics, but you're not so great at the observability part because you're not getting traces and spans. So that's where you invest your effort. So you can work on it as kind of as the same as you would talk about unit testing and test coverage. You can work at it as a visibility coverage concept, and it becomes easier to prioritize your efforts. So pipeline analytics is a separate technical capability that you would build into your org that we talked about. And observability is what happens in production. Again, what does pipeline analytics do for observability? It adds context. It makes the job of the SRE easier because they have access now to data, for example, about releases. So if you're there's this concept of release validation and release testing. Like something happens in production, you want to know what build it's a part of. Once you know what build it's a part of, you want to know what Jenkins pipeline was used. Once you know what Jenkins pipeline was used, you want to know that all of the testing or all the things that happened prior to that. And that is all excellent data to resolve the incident faster. But also, when you do your PIR, your post-incident review, you need this data so that you can improve. And that's the feedback loop. So it really makes everybody's lives better, even if the SREs are not driving pipeline analytics directly.
Thank you. That makes it a lot clearer. So, well, just to tie up, what should people do next? What would you suggest someone does? Like they've listened to this, they think it's interesting, they might want to look at their end code to cloud visibility coverage. What should they do?
Yeah. Well, first I'll start what you should not do.
Okay, that's great. Go for it.
What you should not do is collect and visualize the data because it's there. So for example, if you have GitHub, Hashi, Artifactory, all of these tools, you shouldn't just go, it's so easy for you to go and turn these add-ons on in Splunk Cloud, get the data and have the dashboards and then say, we're done. It's super easy to do that. Don't do that. Why don't you do that? Because if you don't know what you intend to measure, you're not going to increase your visibility, because visibility only comes in the value you get from the data, turn data into doing, right? The doing part matters a lot here. So your first job is to decide what you want to measure and why. So let's say, for example, you decide, like we're really concerned. We don't have a good handle on how we handle secrets, how we leverage secrets in our engineering org.
Yeah.
We want better visibility into that. Great. Start there. So let's say you're using HashiVault. Start with the HashiVault app, but more specifically, start with the portion of that application that delivers that value, which is they have a dashboard that says who's creating secrets leases, how long they're creating them for, what sort of user policy they're using, whether it's root, etc. Where are they creating these leases from around the world? That's where you start, and that's where you turn your focus. The reason you do that is because if you go with the boil the ocean approach, then you're going to create an interesting form of tech debt where you don't really know what you have, versus being very deliberate and saying, we now are confident, we know what's going on with secrets in our delivery chain. Now let's go and look at vulnerability scans and gain the same level of confidence there. Now, and I would argue that I am making an assumption that you use secrets. I am making an assumption that you do code quality scans and vulnerability scans. If you're not doing either of those, you need to figure that out first. I have been shockingly surprised at the number of organizations, one in particular, which was, how do I say this? Responsible for operating in very secure environments, was not doing vulnerability scans, and it blew my mind. So do that first.
Yes.
But the next thing is to pick your focus. We have the tools to make that visible, make it visible, and then expand your code to cloud visibility from there.
I love
The other
the
thing,
bite-sized chunks. I think that's, yeah.
The other thing is if you believe culture is going to be a challenge, you need to address that in parallel. I think that that's important. And I said something earlier that is rather radical, which is you can operationalize culture. Culture happens no matter what. The point of saying operationalize culture, it means that you make that a deliberate element in your environment. Some of the ways of doing that is, for example, like I talked about the DORA metrics. People get really excited when you start measuring velocity across your delivery chain. It gets them interested, and it becomes a loss leader into, look at all this great thing that we can do. Let's do more of it to expand our visibility. And that's one way to kind of pull culture into the organization. But it's a hard conversation. It has to happen bottom up, top down. If that is a struggle, it's worth kind of creating an exercise around how do we be more deliberate about creating a culture that is silo free. That's the biggest thing, is removing fiefdoms.
Yeah. I think if you're listening and you want a hand, or at least a chat through about working out what your next steps, do contact Somerford or Chris in Splunk, because we can certainly just help with the guidance on what we've seen other people do first off. Well, look, it's been really interesting to talk to you, Chris.
Yeah, it's fun.
Thank you so much for bringing a lot of clarity on this big nebulous DevSecOps for me. I find it fascinating. Obviously, it's very like my degree, but also I'm very excited about the potential that Splunk can bring to it. So, yes, thank you very much for talking it through. And I hope it's been useful. If other people are listening and are finding it useful, do give us feedback. We'll do episode 4 or whatever feedback we get.
Actually, that would be really interesting. Is questions that pop up, or absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I'll leave you to your breakfast. Chris is dialing in at a horribly early time, and I'm happily in my afternoon. But thank you.
Could you imagine how good I would be if we did this in the middle of the day?
I don't think I'd be able to keep up. That was fast paced enough for me. Okay. If you could get faster, don't.
Yeah.
No, it's good. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you. Have a great day.